We're going to get started right away with Chapter 5. We should get at least 3 sections in, maybe 4 before break. So look in your notes. You should have this. If you don't have these, let me know and I'll email them to you. This is the first section in Chapter 5. It's an easy one, but it's definitely worth the review. And it's how to read decimals. Okay? Definitely worth the review. How to read some decimals. And the one thing that I want you to realize is that if you have a decimal in the number, that's where we slip in the and. Remember I kept saying there's never an and in the number unless there's a decimal. So the decimal in any number is written and read as the and part. So we know how to read that number before the decimal. That would just be 17. And then we're going to go to the chart. So most people forget that there's no oneths position, that the number directly after the decimal is what's called the tenths position. And I wrote it as a fraction, 1/10. So this is what we kind of have to start getting down. You're going to hear me go tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, 100,000ths. And the key thing is these numbers have a TH in it. So when you write these out in words, make sure that you put the TH attaching to it if it comes after the decimal. So we're going to just read the number 17 and then you're going to say 758. And then to let the viewer know that this number comes after that decimal, after the and, you have to tell it what position. So it's in the 758, and whatever that last number falls in, you're going to sneak in that word, thousandths in this case. So 17 and 758 thousandths. Okay, and this is where I says look at the chart. The 8, that last number in the series of digits, ends on the thousandths part of the chart. I'm down here at the bottom. And so that's how you would read that, or how you would write it out in words. Okay? So let's try it. So it says write each decimal number in words. So first, you can write out 0 and 6, but if it's just a 0, we usually just start with the 6. And then we need to let the viewer know where that position is, so that the first position after the decimal is 6/10. Now, what would happen if this was the number? So you would still say 6, but then you would let the viewer know it was in the tenths, hundredths, so 6/100ths. Do you see why it's really important to let the viewer know what position that is? Because we both say 6, and then the number that follows lets everyone know what position that's in. So this would be 2. The decimal is and that number is 82. And then we need to let it know what position. So 82, tenths is the first spot, hundredths is the second spot. So you label at the very last digit. So that would be 82 hundredths. So it's 100 with a THS on it. Hundredths. All right, so this one would be 21. And is the decimal. And then we're just going to write, it's 93. And 93 and then we need to count it. So it's tenths, hundredths, thousandths. That 3 is in the thousandths position. So 21 and 93 thousandths. So take a minute, pause, and then try writing those ones out in words, okay? So take a minute, pause the video, and see how you do writing those out in words. All right, let's see how you did. So this would be 8/10, because it's directly after the decimal. this would be 5 and, the decimals and, 29, and it would be tenths, hundredths. And this would be 42 and 54 tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Make sense? All right, so in words means words, and standard form means numbers only. Okay. So 48 and 26 hundredths. All right. So we know the 48 and we know the and. So if it's hundredths, it goes tenths, hundredths. So the last number has to end with 2 positions. So 26, the 6 is going to end on that last position. So it would be 48 and 26 hundredths. It's a little different. Let's try this one. So 6 and 95 thousandths. So it's 6 and, all right, look, it goes tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So we want the 5 to be in that last spot. So 95, and then we'll have to fill in a 0. I don't want to see you do this, because that's 6 and 950 thousandths. This says 6 and 95 thousandths. Does that make sense? All right, let's try this one. So this is 5 and 2 tenths. So the tenths is just one spot after the decimal. So we'll put the 2 there. All right. 9 and 8 hundredths. So I know I need 2 spots, and the 8's going to go in the very last spot. So then if you have spaces that have no number in it, you need to fill in as a 0 as a placeholder. So that's 9 and 8 hundredths. I'm hoping that makes some sense. Okay? So I said, when rewriting from words to decimal, make sure the last digit is the correct place, and then you have to maybe insert some zeros in there if you need to. All right, so let's look at writing a decimal as a fraction. So basically, you just kind of write it as a fraction, how you read it. So this would be 7 tenths. So it would be 7 tenths, right? This is 51 hundredths, tenths, hundredths. So it would just be 51 hundredths, right? That kind of makes sense, right? This is 5 hundredths, but that's not in simplest form. And just as a quick reminder, right, if you pop your fraction into your calculator, it will automatically simplify it for you when you hit enter, right? So sometimes they'll ask you to simplify it after you write it in, it'll ask you to write it in words, fraction, and then simplest form. So 2 and 4 tenths. Looks something like that. But the 4 tenths, they're both even, right? So I know what 2 is going to be a common factor to both of those. So that's why the answer in the back of the book will say 2 and 2/5, or on my math lab. They're going to ask you to write these in simplest form. So this is a good answer, but it's not simplest form. So that's why they're going to say, hey, your answer's right, but you might want to write it in simplest form. All right, so let's try a couple of these. Here, I'm going to walk you through this first one, and then I want you to just try them. So this is 37 hundredths. So you can see why that says 37 over 100. And then 37 hundredths. So they're going to give you one piece and ask you to fill in the rest. So why don't you pause the video and see how you do on those, okay? Give it a pause and then see how you do. Make sure you write that fraction in simplest form, okay? Write the fraction in simplest form. All right, let's see how you did. So 8 tenths, I'm good with that. It's just one spot after the decimal. And 8 tenths would read just like that, but they're both even. So we know a 2 can come out of both of those, right? 8 is 2 times 4, and 10 is 2 times 5. So my math lab's really going to want 4/5. Okay, so just be careful of that. So this is 5 tenths. So that's the first spot after the decimal. 5 tenths looks like that, and I'm hoping you guys recognize that as 1/2. All right, this is tenths. That's kind of hard to read. I'll write it out like this. This is what it looks like in real life. So we've got tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So it's going to be 77 thousandths. Okay, and then as a fraction, it's 77 over 1,000. And we're not going to be able to simplify that. Okay, here I'll write this one out better too. It's hard to see where that decimal is. It looks like that. So this will be tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So it's 19 thousandths. So it'll be 19 over 1,000. Okay, so let's flip, play a little bit more. All right, so comparing decimals, I'm going to give you some nice helpful hints. So they say when you compare digits in the same place from left to right, that's what you want to do. When you do that, you find the first digits that aren't the same, that aren't equal, and then if their numbers are both positive, the number with the largest digit is the larger number, right? So we've got the 2's are the same. The 8's are the same. There's my decimal point. The 2's are the same, and oh, right here. These are the first numbers that aren't the same, so since the numbers are both positive, the 6 is bigger than the 5, we're going to eat the number on the right. And here they said, for any decimals, writing zeros after the last digit to the right of the decimal point doesn't change the value of the number. So they're saying this because sometimes when the numbers aren't the same length, it's nice to tack on some zeros to compare the numbers. And here, I'm going to come down and do this one. Do you see this is 0.54 and then 0.504? They're not the same length. But if you want to put a 0 there, you can, if that makes it look a little bit better. So you've got the 0, the decimal, the 5, the 4, and the 0. The 4 is bigger than the 0. This is the first two numbers that aren't the same, so we're going to eat that. See, a lot of people want to eat that number because it's longer, but longer doesn't necessarily mean that the number has a larger value, right? It's because you can add zeros until the day is long, and it's not going to change the value of that decimal. All right, so why don't you pause the video and just see how you do on it, all right? Just see how you do, and then we'll check and see if you did okay. All right. So let's go ahead and do this one. So the first digits that aren't the same are the 8 and the 2. So I'm going to eat the 8. I'm going to do all the positive numbers, and then we'll come back and do the negative ones. All right, so we did this one. C is negative. I'm going to come back and do that one. All right, now look. These zeros really don't have a lot of meaning, right? I said you can add as many zeros as you want to the last digit after the decimal. So these zeros don't mean anything. I can add 3 zeros here if I want. Do you see that these two numbers are equal? All right. Hopefully it's pretty easy to see that the 0.16 is bigger than the 0.15. If you don't like the looks that they're not the same length, go ahead and add some zeros. But I'm hoping you'll see that right after the decimal, this is a 0 and this is a 2. So we're going to eat that decimal. Do you notice that these are the exact same number, right? I can add zeros after that 9. And you see these numbers are the same. All right, now with negatives, it's like the absolute opposite of positives. So the bigger the number looks, the smaller it is. So with negatives, it's the opposite. So the first two numbers that are different are the 7 and the 3. The bigger it looks for negatives, the smaller it is. So I'm going to eat the 0.32, the negative 0.32. Because this number is further away from the 0 on the left-hand side. That makes it smaller. The further you are to the left on the number line, the smaller you are. Okay? So for this one, all right, the first number that they're different are the 3 and the 4, right? But I'm telling you, the bigger it looks, the smaller it is. So we're going to eat this guy. For negative numbers, the larger it looks, the smaller the actual number is. So we'll eat that guy. That's just for negatives. Just for negatives. Okay? And then the last little tidbit, and we'll wrap it up, is rounding. And the rules for rounding are the same. All right? Exact same. So if we round to the nearest tenth, then I'm going to underline the tenths position and make my wall. And say, okay, do I want to keep the 2 or make it higher? And then you look to the 3. The 3 is to the right of the 2. So locate the digit to the right of the tenths place. Since the digit to the right is less than 5, we keep the 2 and drop all the digits to the right of 2. I mean, usually I say then everything becomes 0. I mean, you can do that, but remember those zeros don't really mean anything. So why would we write all those out? We just drop everything. You can write them, but you don't need to. Just don't waste your ink. So round to the nearest hundredths. So tenths, hundredths. Okay, so do I keep the 2 or do I make it larger? So the digit to the right of the hundredths place, it's the 7. So since the digit to the right of 2 is 5 or greater, we're going to add 1 to that. We're going to make it higher. And then it says drop all the digits to the right. I mean, normally we make them all 0, but if the zeros come after the decimal, they don't have any meaning, right? As long as they come after the digit to the right, the furthest digit to the right of the decimal. So rounding that to the nearest hundredths, right? We don't need to write that 0, so we can just cross it off. We don't need it. So take your time, turn off the video, and just see how you do rounding those to the nearest tenths or hundredths or thousandths. Go ahead, give it a try. I know you guys know how to round. So see how you do, and then turn the video back on. Okay, so to the nearest tenth, do we keep the 6 or make it higher? Right, here's my wall. So because the number on the other side of the wall is smaller than 5, we keep the 6. And then we don't have to write any numbers after that, right? We don't have to. You can make them zeros, but since they're after that last digit, after the decimal, you don't need to write them. Okay, to the nearest tenth, okay, there's my 2, and then I'll make my wall. Now remember, you've got to write all the digits that come before. Don't forget that. So we have to write the 98,207. There's my decimal. And then do I keep the 2 or make it higher? I keep it, And then we don't have to worry about any of those numbers after, because they're after the decimal. We don't have to write those zeros in. Don't forget to write the numbers that come before the decimal, though. All right, to the nearest hundredths. So tenths, hundredths. So do I keep that 9 or make it higher? Well, I look to the other side of the wall, and it's a 2, so that 2 says just to keep the 9. So did you guys write 0.89 or 89 hundredths? And to the nearest thousandths, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. That 2 is in the thousandth spot. So we have to write everything that comes before the 2 and then say, do I keep the 2 or make it higher? Because that 8's bigger than 5, it's telling us to make it higher. How'd you do? Did you guys do okay? If not, you give me a shout and we can see each other on a Zoom room. A bunch of you are doing that. I'm so happy that you are. It's so nice to see your faces. Please give it a try, right? Just give it a try this week and see how it goes. All right, so this is out of my math lab. Give it a try. Turn off the video and see how you do on it, okay? Really practice it and be wary whether it says tens, hundreds, tenths, or hundredths, okay? Give it a try, turn off the video, and see how you do on it. All right, let's see how you did. Okay, so tenths, we've got that 5, right? And I look to the right of the 5, I've got a number bigger than 5. So that's telling me I want to make that 5 higher. So you got to write everything that becomes before, and then we're going to make the 5 higher. And then you don't need to write those zeros if you don't want to. Because they're after, the zeros are after the last digit that comes after the decimal. All right, hundredths is the 9. So we have to write everything that comes before. And then, do we keep the 9 or make it higher? That 4 says keep it. All right, now tens, this is where people get goofed up. So this is ones, and this is tens. Right there's the 10th spot. So do I keep the 7 or make it higher? You look to the right, and that 5 says, hey, make it higher. So the 8 comes before. We make the 7 higher, and then before the decimal, right, you have to make everything 0. Now, if there's a decimal, remember the zeros after the decimal don't have a lot of meaning, so you don't have to write all those zeros out if you don't want to. You can just